Good day and welcome to yet another one of our Ransford's weekly wraps. As usual, what we'll do is we'll cover some stuff that happened in the last week or so and discuss how it affects you and your investments going forward. 3 topics as usual. The first one is going to be what's happening with the dollar, what's happening with currencies. The next is going to be the tech sector. We had some earnings come out, and we had, of course, the big deal with Twitter. And finally, we're going to discuss politics. Politics has been on the news for a while, and we'll discuss why politics are important and going to be more important going forward, and how you might want to deal with it in terms of your investments. Okay, starting off, let's talk about what's happening with the dollar. The dollar has been incredibly strong for the last year or so. We know the rand at 18 plus, the pound, went to almost parity. The euro went past parity. We've seen like some currencies in Africa, and the naira weakening dramatically. The Ghanaian cedi weakening also dramatically. Now, in the last couple of days, there's been a slight reversal, not a total reversal, a slight reversal. So, for instance, the rand at one point in time, in the last couple of days, hit 1850. Now, last time I checked, it was 1806. The pound basically has gone to $1.16, $1.16 per pound after being close to, $1 to the pound. Euro back at parity after being, below parity. The Ghanaian cedi, for instance, was at 14 and come back down to about 13.80. So a slight pullback, not a dramatic one, but why is this happening? This is happening because the market is once again believing that we are going to see a reversal from the Fed like really soon. And that is why you're seeing, for instance, the dollar weakening slightly. You're seeing, for instance, the stock market, the S&P 500 going up. I think it's up 10% since the lows of 2 weeks ago. Dow up, NASDAQ, improvement. That's all driven by the idea that the US Fed is going to be reversing soon. Again, I restate my assumption. I don't think the Fed will basically reverse this soon. It will reverse. It will break well before the 2% inflation rate is hit, but it won't happen when the inflation rate goes from 9 to 8. Okay, I would expect at least past 6% before you can see a comfort in terms of reversal, at least 7 maybe, but not when it goes from 9 to 8. That doesn't show enough evidence that the Fed is going to be looking to cut rates. We might get a pause at around 7. We might get reversals being talked about around 6. We're not going to get reversals talked about at 8. Okay, so that's one bit of optimism I think is overdone. The next thing to discuss is what's happening in the tech sector. Now, I talked about the fact that, we had a couple of results. We had Alphabet, we had Microsoft results come out. Slightly disappointing in terms of what's happening because of the economy. Alphabet showed a big pullback in terms of earnings. That has to be expected because, Alphabet is Google. Google gets most of its earnings from advertising, and advertising is one of the first things that corporates cut when they have trouble. Before they start cutting staff, they start looking at cutting advertising, and that comes through some of Alphabet's earnings. Microsoft is also showing the effects of what they think is an economic slowdown come through. And they are saying that they expect activity to really come under a bit of pressure in the next year or so because of the weaker economic condition in the world. Then we have Twitter. Now, Elon Musk has come out and said he's looking to basically take control of Twitter really soon. In fact, as I'm recording this and you watch it a day or so later, by the time you guys watch this, it might actually have been done already. He might have actually taken control of Twitter. And quite frankly, the important thing here is not so much that Twitter is getting taken over, it's what he wants to do when he gets his hands on Twitter. He wants to cut 75% of staff. That's 3 out of 4 staff members at Twitter. Obviously, you've seen the whole kind of hullabaloo about staff talking about, not being treated with dignity and so on. But the interesting point here is that if he's able to pull this off, I think even if he gets it like half the staff cut down, I think this is going to be very important for the tech sector. The tech sector in the US has been incredibly generous in terms of employment benefits, in terms of salaries to its staff. I think one of the reasons we've seen so much activism among places like Google and Microsoft is people literally don't have enough to do, and therefore they're looking to get some kind of activity in the day, and so they're working on activism, they're working on other things, not just the jobs that they're supposed to be doing, because they don't have that much to do. Look at Google. I mean, you've used Google for a while, I've used Google for a while. Do you notice any major difference in the last couple of years? No. Facebook, major differences? Not really. Look at the staff numbers, however, they've increased dramatically. I mean, why are these staff numbers increasing when the product that we basically been using has stayed the same for multiple years? It's because there's a lot of bloat happening in the system. Okay, and I think what's going to happen going forward is that if Twitter can actually get its hands on, or get its basically control over staff numbers, cut them dramatically, half, maybe a third even, doesn't have to be the 75% that Elon talks about, and show no real drop-off in productivity, then you're going to see a lot of pressure on companies like Facebook, on Alphabet, on Microsoft, basically to cut back on staff as well, because those places have seen this huge blow to come through already. And speaking of Facebook, I think one thing to look at the moment is that Apple is changing some of its rules. And remember, one reason that Facebook really dropped down was because of Apple's changes in terms of its privacy rules. Keep an eye on what's happening with Apple. Apple's come under pressure with regards to some of the regulators out there because of the monopoly power. And if you see Apple relax some of those rules, we could see a bit of a rebound in Facebook/Meta, whatever it's called nowadays. But just another side event there. But Facebook as well, like Alphabet, Google, probably are also going to be reducing staff if we can see Elon Musk take over Twitter really do well with a lower staff count. And then finally, we're going to talk about politics. Okay, so what about politics and why is it so important right now? So we had a number of major events happening. So firstly, we had Italian politics, we had Swedish politics, we had UK politics, all in the news recently. The Swedes and the Italians both went towards a more right-wing party. The Swedes are very left-wing, so anything slightly to the right is extreme right-wing for them. And they've got a pre-right-wing party come in. The Italians have gone proper right-wing. This is a party that basically was the effective successor of Alberto Mussolini's party. This party basically is, effectively the successor to the fascist parties of the 1940s. You know what I mean? So we're talking about Benito Mussolini. Sorry, I'm thinking it's Benito Mussolini. Yeah. So in terms of the politics of Europe is going very right wing. We've also had a shake-up in the UK. Liz Truss, shortest leader the UK has ever had, 44 days, has been replaced by Rishi Sunak, the first guy of Indian descent, running the UK. And interesting fact, apparently if he lasts till December, which right now, the last guy lasts 44 days, the last leader lasted 44 days. 44 days won't get you to December, but if he does get to December, there's a good chance that when the Irish and English, or Irish and British leaders meet, you're going to find two guys of Indian descent running both those countries. It's an interesting little takeover, a little bit of trivia out there. But anyway, Rishi Sunak is in charge right now. He's got a really big problem on his hands. He's got an economy that's going to be in trouble with regards to spending. He's got this crisis for energy coming through the winter. He's got a pound that's weakened. He's got a central bank that's, trying to do whatever it can to save the pension industry and save the financial sector. It's got a pension industry, of course, that has trouble with things like that liability-driven investments. And at the same time, we have the US having elections basically in 2 weeks' time on the 8th of November. And those elections, the midterm elections, are going to effectively decide who runs the Senate and who runs the Congress. The Senate basically, the way the US system works is kind of laws flow from the Congress to the Senate and get signed by the president. If you're the president and your party does not control either the Congress or the Senate, or worst case scenario, doesn't control either one of them, both of them are not controlled by you, then what happens is you have a situation where, yes, you are the president of the country, but you can't really do much. You can't get laws passed, you can't get anything done except through what's called executive order, where you basically sign things into law, but that's usually going to result in some kind of pushback by the court system. If a party has the Congress, the Senate, and the presidency, like the Democrats have right now, the Senate they have on a very bare minimum, like basically they're 50-50 and the tiebreaker is given up by the president, so the vice president. So the vice president is Democratic, so it'll be the Democratic Senate. They own the Congress by a small amount as well, but they have enough power to push through whatever they want if they can keep their unity in terms of their the voting discipline. However, if the Republicans get the Congress, falls apart. If they get the Senate, it's even worse, because not only can't you pass laws, you can't even get appointments done. Things like Supreme Court justices or those kind of appointments go through the Senate, and if you can't get that done, you can have real trouble with regards to, pushing your agenda forward as a president. Right now, it looks like the Congress is almost certainly going to go to the Republicans. There is a bit in favor of the Democrats in the Senate, but that's, really touch and go. So there's like about a 4-to-1 kind of ratio of the Republicans winning Congress. Okay, there's probably a 3-to-2 ratio of the Democrats winning the Senate. Okay, so there's a lot in flux there. There's also some cases, for instance, there's some very weird things happening. For instance, Dr. Oz, the guy from Oprah, is running for Senate in Pennsylvania. The guy he's running against has had a stroke, so he can not talk as well as he used to. And he had a debate recently where it was disastrous. That's the only way to describe it. And so you could be finding, if that flips over to Dr. Oz, significantly higher chance of Republicans winning the Senate. It really is, raise the hedge in terms of what can be happening there. And why is this more important now than it's? Oh, of course, we had China as well. China just ended its last Congress. We have it every 5 years or so. It is something where they have had a set pattern for a little while where, what you do is you get a term. In the middle of your term, first 5 years, after the first 5 years, you basically appoint your successor. The next 5 years, your successor is known. So when you retire after 10 years, the successor has been known for 5 years, and he does the same thing going forward. Xi Jinping has changed that. And what has happened then is we are seeing him taking total control over his party. Total control of up to a level where there's a video circulating out there at the moment that shows the previous, premier, Hu Jintao, effectively being escorted out. Apparently, there's rumors that he mumbled something that Xi Jinping didn't like, and he had him taken away. Effectively, you're probably not going to see Hu again, because he's probably going to go out of public life and be in retirement, not make any public appearances, not having any public speeches ever again. So that just shows the kind of ruthlessness of Xi. It also shows his power. The ability to treat your predecessor like that is incredibly, demonstrative of the power he has. Now, why am I talking about all the stuff at the moment? Because I think there's a trend happening in the world that's going to make governments a lot more important than they have been. Why? Firstly, we are having what's called nearshoring, onshoring, or friendshoring. What's happened is, over the last couple of decades, a lot of production has moved to places in the world that the US and its allies don't think are safe. Primarily China. They don't want to deal with China because they think China is about to be due to Russia, and there's going to be a conflict with China in the near term. In that scenario, you don't want to have all your stuff made in China. So what you want to do, you want to basically move some production locally, or at least into friendly countries. Okay. Now, why is that important? Well, that is being driven up by market forces, driven by government incentives. The government's going to control that stuff. Okay. The next thing is, if the governments of the world are controlling all the stuff here, moving things more closer to their local operations, what's going to be the effect on the global economy? Well, when you take something from somewhere very productive and put that same production somewhere less productive, which is what we can assume safely, because there's the reason China is the big producer of the world is because they've been the most productive country. You'd expect inflation to rise. Obviously, if you basically take it from a place that's more productive and move your production to somewhere that's less productive, costs are going to rise. That's what productivity means, is how much you can make for a certain amount of cost. The costs are going to rise, number one. Number two, we're going to find growth dropping because, there's that drop off in growth because you have less trade, you have less demand for places like China, you're going to have, less stuff being made because, like I said, we're talking about less stuff being produced. When you have lower growth and you have high prices, that is stagflation. And I think that's going to be a trend that goes forward from here. The trend of stagflation, because as the US and Europe and so on starts to bring production home, that production is going to become more expensive. The production is also going to be lower. This is the function of how things work. That lower growth as well as high prices, stagflation. And why is this important? Well, as we look at what's happening globally, with the populist uprisings in Europe, with the total destruction which appears to be at the moment of the Tory party. Yes, Rishi Sunak is Tory and he's basically in power, but if the elections were held today, they'd have the biggest loss they've ever had in history, effectively, because the lead that Labour has over them, which is the opposition party, has over the Tories, is gigantic. So they're basically, almost a lame duck. They're walking on borrowed time, living on borrowed time. And the US right now, we have this whole, Republican versus Democrat kind of like switch around is going to be happening. And when it does happen, what you're going to find is that there's going to be much less coordination between the Republicans and Democrats than there was between the Democrats and the Democrats. And that's because of the fact that in the US, with the first past the post system, you're going to be finding a lot of reasons why you don't want to be cooperating with your opponent. You cooperate with your opponent, he looks better, he gets the win, and you don't get back into power. You don't cooperate with your opponent, the economy does worse, he gets the blame, you take over. That's the kind of zero-sum game that the US is playing at the moment. And for you as an investor, what does that mean? Firstly, if government's going to be a bigger part of investment decisions going forward, look to the stuff that governments like. Governments like ESG. ESG investments are probably going to do better than normal. Next thing, what is going to be onshore? What are they looking at doing? What are the real challenges they're going to be having? Chips, energy, commodities. So look to have, or look at basically, the commodity companies, energy companies, chip makers in the developed world. Those are probably going to be doing better than would have been otherwise, because the government's effectively forcing the competition to disappear. When you have forced competition to disappear, your profits tend to go up. And so those are the two things I want to look at. It's the ESG as well as commodities and other companies that are going to be dealing with a lack of competition from international sources. And that's it for this week. Thanks for coming through, and I look forward to speaking to you guys again next week. Cheers.